It began with silence. A silence so heavy it seemed to press down on every wall of Windsor Castle, as though even the ancient stones were holding their breath. Outside, rain tapped gently against the window panes, a faint rhythm marking the passage of time. Inside, a woman lay frail and pale beneath the soft light of a bedside lamp. Her crown no longer sat on her head, but her presence, that unmistakable authority, that calm strength, still filled the room. It was Queen Elizabeth's final night on Earth, and in those last hours, she whispered something that would tear her family apart. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. You've heard rumors, haven't you? About secret letters, forbidden recordings, final words spoken only to one person. But this was different. Because what the Queen said before she died wasn't just a reflection on her reign or a blessing for her children. It was a warning, a wish so powerful that even now, it shakes the very foundations of the royal family. And when Princess and the daughter known for her iron will and blunt tongue finally revealed those words, it sent shockwaves through Buckingham Palace and through Meghan Markle's world. But let's start at the beginning. Because this story isn't just about a dying wish. It's about the power of legacy, the cost of betrayal, and the one woman who dared to speak the truth, no matter how devastating it would be. The night Queen Elizabeth passed, the atmosphere inside Balmoral Castle was eerily calm. Courtiers moved in slow, respectful silence. Doctors spoke in hushed tones. Outside the gates, the world waited, unaware that the monarchy was about to face its most personal reckoning. Princess Anne was there, steadfast, composed, the picture of royal discipline. She had always been her mother's confidant, her quiet soldier, the one who didn't seek fame or flattery. To the public, she was the practical princess. To the Queen, she was the one she could trust when no one else could. And in those final hours, as the Queen's voice weakened and her breathing slowed and leaned closer, what she heard changed everything. "Protect the crown," the Queen murmured. From pretenders, from those who wore loyalty like a costume, and froze. Her mother's hand trembled in hers. "Do you mean?" she began. But the Queen only nodded, her gaze clouded with both pain and resolve. She must never return. Those 6 words. Simple. Final. But their meaning? Explosive. She must never return. Who was the Queen referring to? And knew instantly, the Duchess of Sussex. Meghan Markle. The woman whose arrival had turned the royal household upside down, whose charm once captivated the world, and whose departure nearly broke it. And yet, to truly understand why the Queen uttered those words, you have to go back years, to the quiet moments behind the grandeur, to the things the cameras never showed. The Queen was not a woman of rash judgment. She'd endured scandal after scandal, from Diana's tragic story to Andrew's disgrace. She'd forgiven, endured, adapted. But this was different. With Meghan, it wasn't just rebellion. It was something the Queen saw as dangerous, a deliberate dismantling of everything she'd built. When Meghan and Harry announced they were leaving royal life, the Queen didn't weep publicly. She never did. But those closest to her say she spent nights awake, reading reports, letters, even social media posts, trying to understand where it all went wrong. "I've spent my life serving the crown," she reportedly told Anne once, "and I fear it will all be undone by those who think duty is a brand." It wasn't cruelty that shaped her final wish, it was fear. Fear that the monarchy she'd nurtured for 70 years would crumble under the weight of modern ambition and media manipulation. And so, as she felt her life ebbing away, she called her daughter to her side, the one she trusted most, and gave her a mission: protect the monarchy from those who would use it. Now imagine that moment. The soft beeping of monitors. The faint scent of antiseptic and lavender. The Queen's frail hand gripping Anne's. The rain outside slowing, as though the world itself paused to listen. And then, that whisper. That final command. It wasn't written down. Not yet. But someone heard it. Someone else was in that room. A royal aide, longtime servant of the crown, tasked with recording the Queen's private thoughts for the royal archives. No one knew that microphone was still on. And that's where the story takes a turn that no one could have anticipated. Because days later, after the funeral, as the world mourned and the royal family grieved in silence, something odd happened. A sealed envelope appeared in Princess Anne's study. No note. No explanation. Just a wax seal bearing the royal crest and one word written in her mother's handwriting: truth, and hesitated before opening it. Her hands, usually so steady, trembled. Inside, she found a single piece of parchment, a transcript of her mother's final words. At the bottom, a signature: Elizabeth R. She must never return. You can imagine Anne's shock. Her loyalty had always been to the crown, but this was personal. Her mother had never spoken with such finality about anyone, not even about those who betrayed her trust before. And now, this burden, this dying wish, was placed squarely on Anne's shoulders. But here's where things become even more complicated. Because while the world moved on, someone else got wind of that letter. Someone who wasn't supposed to know. Meghan. According to palace insiders, Meghan's team received whispers of a royal deathbed directive, something said by the Queen that could threaten her public image. At first, she dismissed it as gossip. But as more reports emerged, and as Princess Anne grew more visible in public, Meghan's panic grew. Her team allegedly scrambled to control the narrative, pushing back against any rumors of royal resentment. But you can't spin what hasn't been revealed yet. And, silent, calculating, resolute, said nothing. Not yet. For nearly 2 years, she held her mother's secret. She kept that letter locked away, guarded like a piece of the crown jewels. And during that time, she watched as Meghan and Harry continued to give interviews, documentaries, speeches, each one painting the royal family in shades of cruelty and prejudice. Watched as the institution her mother died protecting became the target of global criticism. And silence was not weakness. It was restraint. Because when she finally chose to speak, it wouldn't be out of spite, it would be out of duty. And then, something unexpected happened. In a recent private gathering, a royal historian, a man with decades of access to the archives, stumbled upon something buried deep in Windsor's restricted files. A recording. Faint, scratchy, but unmistakable. The Queen's voice. That discovery forced Anne's hand. Imagine the weight of that moment. The realization that the world's most respected monarch had left behind proof. Not rumor, not speculation, but proof of her final wish. Proof that could either preserve the monarchy or destroy what was left of her family's fragile unity. And could have destroyed it. She could have locked it away forever, preserving peace at the cost of truth. But she didn't. She couldn't. Mother's words weren't meant to be hidden, she reportedly told a close friend. They were meant to be remembered. And so, after months of silence, Princess Anne decided to reveal the Queen's final wish, and the world was not ready for what she said. When the story broke, it hit the press like a thunderclap. Every major outlet from London to Los Angeles carried the headline. Princess Anne reveals Queen Elizabeth's final wish, Meghan Markle never to return. Social media erupted. Royal commentators scrambled. Was it true? Was it a misinterpretation? Or had the Queen, in her final breath, truly sealed Meghan's fate? The palace refused to comment. The Sussex team denied everything. But the damage was done. Because this wasn't just about Meghan anymore. This was about legacy. About what the Queen truly thought of the woman who had, in the public eye, fractured her family. The public began to question everything. Was Meghan's portrayal of royal life genuine or calculated? Was her suffering real, or was it part of a carefully built image? And most importantly, if the Queen had truly wished for her permanent exclusion, what did she know that the world didn't? The tension reached a fever pitch when sources close to Buckingham revealed that Anne wasn't finished speaking, that there was more to come, more than just one wish. Because according to insiders, the Queen left not one message, but several. Some were sealed in private letters. Others, whispered to confidants. And together, they painted a chilling portrait of a monarch who foresaw betrayal and tried, in her last moments, to stop it. Even King Charles reportedly tried to dissuade Anne from making her mother's wish public. It will only deepen the divide, he allegedly told her. But Anne's response was cold and final. The truth doesn't divide, Charles. Lies do. And perhaps that's why this revelation has shaken not only Meghan but the entire institution. Because for the first time, the royal family's internal wounds are no longer hidden behind smiles and ceremonies. They're laid bare, in the words of the one woman who ruled them all. Now, ask yourself, if the Queen's dying wish was to keep Meghan away from royal life forever, what exactly did she witness that made her say that? Was it something Meghan said? Something she did? Or something even darker? A truth the public has yet to hear? Because in the coming chapters, that's what we're going to uncover. The secret conversations, the missing recordings, the letters that should never have seen daylight. This story isn't just a royal revelation, it's a reckoning. And as Princess and steps forward to defend her mother's legacy, the question isn't whether Meghan Markle can return to royal life. The real question is, can the monarchy survive the truth about why she was never meant to? Because the Queen's dying words weren't the end of an era. They were the beginning of a war. And what came next would change everything. And no one saw it coming. It began with the sound of wind howling through the Scottish Highlands. Outside Balmoral Castle, the world was gray, damp, and hushed, as if nature itself had paused to pay its respects. Inside, behind tall, drawn curtains, the Queen of England lay in her private chamber, surrounded not by pomp and ceremony, but by quiet. Only the steady rhythm of her shallow breathing filled the space. The end, everyone knew, was near. But few knew what words would escape her lips before she slipped away forever. Princess and stood near the foot of the bed, hands clasped tightly in front of her. Her eyes, sharp as ever, flicked from the monitors to her mother's face, and had always been the dutiful one, the stoic one, the daughter who never sought the limelight. Now, as her mother's life waned, she wasn't the princess royal. She was simply a daughter watching the most constant figure in her life fade away. At the door stood 2 royal physicians and a private secretary. A nurse moved silently, adjusting the Queen's pillows. The air was heavy with both reverence and fear. Fear that the moment everyone had dreaded for years had finally come. Then, with a faint rustle, the Queen's eyes opened. They were not as bright as before, but the clarity, that unmistakable sharpness, was still there. She scanned the room slowly, taking in the familiar faces. When her gaze found and her lips parted, a whisper of a smile touching them. And the word was barely audible, and stepped forward immediately, leaning in. "I'm here, Mama." The Queen's hand reached for hers, cold, delicate, but purposeful. "I must speak plainly," and nodded. Of course. There was a pause, the kind that seemed to stretch beyond time. Even the nurse froze, instinctively sensing that something profound was about to be said. The private secretary glanced away, respectfully pretending not to listen. But in truth, every ear in that room strained to catch each syllable. "Protect the crown," the Queen breathed. "Protect it from those who would use it," and frowned slightly. "You mean politicians, Mama?" The Queen's head shifted weakly on the pillow. "No, from within." That word, within, landed like a thunderclap in his chest. She had spent her life shielding the institution from outside attacks, from press scandals and government interference. But from within? Who could possibly? Then the Queen's hand tightened around hers with surprising strength. She must never return. And froze. There was no confusion in that tone. It wasn't a wish whispered in delirium. It was a command. Firm, unyielding, final, for a heartbeat, and didn't speak. The words hung in the air like smoke. "Who, Mama?" she finally asked, though she already knew. The Queen's lips trembled. "You know who." And did. The Duchess of Sussex. Meghan Markle. The woman who had charmed the world, captured Harry's heart, and then, in the Queen's eyes, turned her back on everything that crown represented. The Queen's voice, though weak, carried a flicker of the authority that had defined her reign. She cannot be allowed to wear the mantle again. Not after everything. Anne's pulse quickened. She leaned closer. "Mama, you're weak. Let's not." The Queen interrupted her with a faint but firm squeeze. "No, Anne. Listen. Promise me." That word, promise, hit and harder than any royal command ever could. In her entire life, the Queen had rarely asked her for anything personal. Orders, yes. Duties, always. But promises? Almost never. This was no political matter. It was personal, born of pain and conviction. Anne's throat tightened. "I promise," she whispered. The Queen exhaled softly. A single tear escaped the corner of her eye, a sight Anne had seen only twice before, once after her father's death and once after Diana's funeral. "It is not vengeance," the Queen murmured, voice fading. "It is protection," and nodded, unable to speak. The Queen's eyelids fluttered. "You've always known the difference." And then she fell silent. For a moment, no one in the room dared to breathe. The private secretary stepped forward, pretending to check on something at the bedside table. The nurse discreetly turned away, wiping her eyes. And stood frozen, replaying those words again and again in her head. She must never return. They didn't sound cruel. They sounded protective, defensive, like a mother shielding something sacred from harm, and stayed by the bed for hours after that. Even as the physicians whispered updates, even as other family members began to arrive, she remained rooted to that spot, holding her mother's hand, as though letting go would make those words vanish into the void. But the Queen wasn't done speaking. Sometime later, when most of the family had gathered in the corridor, the Queen stirred again. Her breathing was shallow, but her eyes opened once more, and for a brief moment, they were startlingly clear. "And," she whispered again, and bent closer, heart pounding. "Yes, Mama. Don't let my voice be silenced," and felt her breath catch. "I won't." The Queen's lips curved faintly, the ghost of a smile. Then her gaze drifted upward, to the ornate ceiling above, and her hand slowly went limp. The room filled with stillness. Not the gentle stillness of rest, but the kind that comes when history shifts. Outside, the rain had stopped. A faint beam of light broke through the clouds and spilled across the floorboards. Anne's hand trembled as she laid her mother's hand gently across her chest. The weight of those final words pressed down on her shoulders like a crown of iron. She must never return. But what had Meghan done that was so unforgivable? The Queen had been patient with scandal before. She had forgiven Andrew for his transgressions longer than most thought possible. She had endured Diana's heartbreak, Charles's infidelity, even the tabloids' cruelty. Yet with Meghan, something was different, something Anne couldn't yet name. Later that evening, as the news broke worldwide, Queen Elizabeth II has passed away. The cameras flashed outside the gates. Millions mourned. Reporters speculated about succession, inheritance, and tributes. But inside Balmoral, one secret burned quietly between Princess and in her mother's still form. In the hours that followed, courtiers came and went. Papers were signed. Calls were made to London. And amid the swirl of royal duty, a small recording device was removed from the nightstand. The same device that had captured the Queen's private reflections for decades, and barely noticed as a butler slipped it into an evidence case. But later, she would learn something that made her blood run cold. The device had been switched on the entire time. Someone, somewhere, now possessed the Queen's final words. The next morning, Anne walked into her private quarters, exhausted but composed. The world outside her window was bathed in somber sunlight. The phone rang continuously, condolences, briefings, arrangements. But one call stopped her cold. "Your Royal Highness," said the voice on the other end, calm but hesitant. It was Sir Geoffrey Tolland, the senior aide assigned to record and archive the Queen's final days. "I thought you should know. There was an active file." Anne's brow furrowed. "Active file?" "Yes, ma'am. From Her Majesty's bedside. Audio log, timestamped 3 hours before her passing." Anne's heart pounded. And there was a pause. It captured everything. She sat down slowly. "Everything?" "Yes, ma'am. Including her words to you." And he hesitated. The mention of the Duchess. And closed her eyes. Her mother's last command, now immortalized in a recording. If it leaked, it wouldn't just be a private memory. It would be an international scandal. Secure it, and ordered. No one else is to hear it. Not even the king. "Yes, ma'am." But it was too late. Because hours later, as Anne returned to her duties, a quiet stir began to spread through the palace staff. Whispers. Murmurs. "Did you hear what the Queen said?" She named someone. "It's about Meghan, isn't it?" By evening, those whispers had become a low, rumbling storm. That night, Anne sat alone by the fireplace, staring into the flames. She replayed her mother's voice in her mind, gentle yet firm, loving yet resolute. She couldn't escape the weight of those words. She poured herself a small glass of whiskey and stared at the firelight dancing in the glass. She must never return, she muttered under her breath. But why, Mama? Why such finality? There was a knock on the door. It was the same aide from earlier. His expression was pale, uneasy. He bowed slightly before speaking. "Ma'am, forgive me, but the recording, it's missing." Anne's head snapped up. "Missing?" He nodded. "It was placed in the archives safe, but it's not there now. We've checked everywhere." And stood slowly. "Who else knew about it?" "Only myself, and one other. The archivist on duty. But he's gone." "Gone," and repeated sharply. Yes, ma'am. Left the grounds this afternoon. Didn't check out with security. Anne's pulse quickened. Find him. But she didn't need to say it twice. The room suddenly felt colder. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the windows. Somewhere deep in her gut, and knew this wasn't an accident. That recording, the Queen's final wish, was in the wrong hands. As she stood by the window, looking out across the Balmoral lawns, she whispered to herself, "They'll twist her words. They always do." She didn't yet know who they were, but she would. And as the days that followed blurred into one another, the funeral, the speeches, the tributes, Anne's mind stayed locked on that missing recording. Every headline about a loving monarch's peaceful passing made her stomach twist, because she knew the truth wasn't peaceful at all. It was dangerous. Somewhere out there, someone held the Queen's dying confession. And if that someone had any reason to protect Meghan Markle's image or destroy Anne's credibility, that recording could be turned into a weapon. And that, Anne realized, was exactly what was about to happen. Because late one night, 2 weeks after the Queen's burial, a plain white envelope arrived at her private residence in Gloucestershire. No sender, no markings, just one word scrawled on the back, in delicate, looping script. Truth. When she opened it, her heart nearly stopped. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a typed transcript. Every word of her mother's final conversation. The timestamps, the pauses, the name, and beneath it all, a chilling final line that hadn't been spoken aloud that night. She must never return, for her intentions were never pure. Anne's hands shook as she read it. That last phrase, her intentions were never pure, had never left the Queen's lips during their exchange. Someone had altered the transcript. Someone had tampered with the truth. But who? And why? And felt the air drain from the room as realization struck her. The leak wasn't just about scandal. It was about control. Someone wanted to weaponize her mother's final words, either to silence and or to twist the Queen's legacy forever. And that, she thought grimly, she could never allow. She folded the letter carefully, placed it back in the envelope, and whispered to herself, "I'll protect you, Mama, even from them." But what she didn't know was that this was only the beginning, and the real battle over the Queen's final wish hadn't even started yet. Because by morning, the world would hear whispers of a secret recording, and by nightfall, Meghan Markle would already be preparing her response. What came next would send shockwaves through the monarchy, and no one saw it coming. The rain had returned to Balmoral, hammering against the window panes like a quiet, relentless drumbeat. Inside, Princess Anne sat at her desk, that white envelope still lying open in front of her. The ink on the page seemed to mock her, a reminder that the Queen's voice, the one voice she'd sworn to protect, was now in someone else's possession. Someone who wasn't supposed to hear it. Someone who had already twisted it. But who had that kind of access? And had grown up inside the palace machine. She knew its shadows, every hallway, every whisper, every silent betrayal. And she knew one thing for certain. The royal household didn't leak by accident. Every story that escaped those walls was released with purpose. And if the Queen's final words were now floating beyond the castle gates, that purpose had to be calculated. She called her private aide, Captain Miles Redford, a former military intelligence officer who had served beside her for years. His loyalty was unquestioned, his demeanor precise. When he entered the room, he didn't bow. He never did with her. That's how Anne preferred it. "Close the door," she said. He did. "What I'm about to tell you," and continued, her tone low but steady, "does not leave this room." Redford nodded once. Understood. She handed him the envelope. "It's a transcript. From the night my mother passed." He read in silence. The color drained from his face as he reached the end. "This can't be authentic," he murmured. The final line wasn't spoken and interrupted. "It's fabricated." He met her eyes. "Then someone's tampered with it." "Yes," and said grimly. "And I want to know who." Redford hesitated. "May I ask, who else knows of the recording?" "Only the archivist. But he's disappeared." Redford's brows knit. "You think he leaked it?" "I think he was paid to," and replied, her tone sharper than usual. "And whoever paid him knows exactly what they've stolen." She stood, pacing toward the window, watching raindrops trace down the glass. If this recording surfaces, if the world hears those words, it won't be about truth anymore. It'll be about manipulation. Redford nodded slowly. "Then we find the recorder." And turned to him. eyes burning with resolve. Do it quietly. He inclined his head. I'll start immediately. As the door shut behind him and sank into her chair, exhaling deeply. The palace had always been a fortress of secrets, but this was different. The Queen's deathbed was supposed to be sacred ground, a place untouched by politics or publicity. And yet somehow, someone had breached it. What made her stomach twist wasn't the idea that the recording was stolen. It was the realization that the thief knew exactly how valuable it was. Somewhere, in the underbelly of the Royal Information Network, where private aides traded silence for privilege, a copy of her mother's final moments was now currency. And in the right hands, or the wrong ones, it could rewrite history. The next morning, Anne was awakened before dawn by a knock at her door. It was Redford, his expression grim. "We found him, ma'am," he said. "The archivist." And stood instantly. "Where?" "He turned up in London," Redford replied. "Checked into a hotel near Kensington. Alone. Paid in cash." And stomach tightened. "Is he talking?" "Not yet," Redford said. "But there's something else." When we entered the room, he was already gone. Anne's eyes narrowed. "Gone?" He hesitated. "Ma'am." There were signs of a struggle. Anne's blood ran cold. "You mean he's dead?" Redford nodded. And the recorder wasn't there. For a long moment, she said nothing. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Then someone silenced him, she said quietly. "And now they have the only physical proof of what my mother said." But she was wrong, because someone else had a copy, and they were about to use it. That afternoon, in a small apartment in West London, a woman sat hunched over a laptop. Her name was Clara Jennings, a freelance journalist with a reputation for finding stories no one else could. She'd once covered royal charity events, but after a few controversial articles, she'd been cut off from official access. That didn't stop her. If anything, it made her hungrier. She stared at the screen, headphones in her ears. The audio was faint, crackling, like a ghost whispering through static. But even beneath the distortion, one phrase cut through clearly. "She must never return." Clara paused the playback, her heart racing. She replayed it again. There was no mistaking that voice. Calm, aged, unmistakable. Queen Elizabeth II. She leaned back, staring at the ceiling, realization dawning. This wasn't just a leak. It was the biggest royal story of the decade, maybe of the century. But she also knew what it meant to handle something like this. One wrong move, and she'd be blacklisted forever, or worse. She hesitated, fingers hovering over her keyboard. Then curiosity won. She uploaded a short clip to an encrypted cloud drive, labeled simply, Project Windsor. The moment she did, someone else gained access. Because Clara wasn't the only one listening. Meanwhile, back in Gloucester, Anne sat in her study reviewing an old letter from her mother, one written years before Meghan ever entered the picture. It was about duty, sacrifice, and the importance of discernment. "Never let charm blind you," the Queen had written. "It's often the weapon of the cleverest pretenders." And folded the letter carefully and placed it aside. The words now echoed differently. When the phone rang, she answered immediately. "Princess and speaking." "Ma'am." Redford's voice came through, tight and urgent. "There's been a development. Someone's selling the recording." And froze. "Selling?" "Yes. A contact in the press tipped us off. The buyer's unidentified, but the offer came from overseas. Possibly American media." Anne's jaw tightened. "Then it's only a matter of time before Meghan's team hears about it." Redford hesitated. "That's not all. The seller is using a code name." "What code name?" HRH reclaimed. Anne's breath caught. It was too specific, too symbolic. Whoever was behind this wanted the world to believe the tape was Meghan's path back to royal legitimacy. Proof, perhaps, that the Queen had misunderstood her. "They're not just leaking it," Anne murmured. "They're rewriting the story." She stood, walking briskly toward the window again, her silhouette framed by the gray morning light. "Find out who this seller is. I don't care what it takes." But even as she said it, and sensed the tide shifting, the palace machine was waking up. Phone lines buzzed. Advisors convened emergency meetings. Lawyers drafted contingency statements. The monarchy had survived wars, divorces, abdications, but this was new. This was digital warfare, and the battlefield was truth itself. Meanwhile, in Montecito, Meghan Markle sat at her breakfast table, scrolling through her phone. She had just finished a call with her publicist when a new message popped up from an anonymous sender. It contained a single audio file. She pressed play. A faint static hiss filled the room, followed by a voice she knew all too well. Regal, measured, instantly recognizable. She must never return. Meghan's face paled. Her hand trembled slightly. "What is this?" she whispered. The voice on the file continued. There was no context, no setup, just that damning line. And though the Queen's tone wasn't angry, the words carried weight, enough to shatter reputations. Within minutes, Meghan's PR team was on the line, strategizing. "We'll call it a deep fake," one suggested, "or edited audio." But Meghan wasn't listening. She was staring out the window, heart pounding, as one question burned in her mind. How much more did and know? Across the Atlantic, the storm was brewing. The British tabloids got wind of a mysterious royal tape. Online forums buzzed. Was it real? Was it fabricated? And what did the Queen mean by never return? Did she mean Meghan could never rejoin royal life? Or something darker, that her return would bring harm to the crown? Public curiosity grew by the hour. Royal insiders issued denials. Buckingham Palace maintained its silence. But one person was done being silent. That evening, Princess and called her brother, King Charles. "We can't let this spiral," she said. Charles sounded weary, defeated. "You think I don't know that?" Mother's words were private. "If this goes public." She wanted to protect the monarchy and cut in. "We can't let her final wish be turned into a circus." Charles sighed. "Then what do you suggest?" Anne's tone hardened. "We find the source, and we end it before it reaches the press." But it was already too late, because by dawn, the first headlines began to appear. Secret royal recording. Queen Elizabeth's last words about Meghan Markle? Did the Queen ban Meghan from royal life forever? Exclusive. Palace insider confirms final wish rumors. The story spread like wildfire. Social media ignited with hashtags. Royal commentators dissected every possible meaning. Some defended the Queen's right to protect her legacy. Others accused the palace of waging a posthumous war against Meghan. The world was divided, and that was exactly what the anonymous leaker wanted. Meanwhile, Anne sat watching the news in silence. Every image of her mother, every replay of that audio snippet, felt like a wound reopening. She clenched her jaw, barely holding back her frustration. The monarchy had survived decades of scandal. But this time, the weapon wasn't gossip, it was the Queen's own voice. Later that day, Redford returned with new intel. "Ma'am, we've traced the seller's signal. It originated from inside the royal archive." Anne's eyes widened. "Inside?" "Yes, ma'am. Someone still on payroll." For the first time, fear flickered behind her stoic expression. "Then we're compromised." Redford nodded gravely. "And it gets worse. The file's been copied multiple times. There's no way to contain it now." Anne exhaled slowly, gripping the edge of her desk. "Then there's only one option left." Redford waited. "And that is?" She met his eyes, cold and unwavering. "If they want the Queen's words, we'll give them the truth. All of it." He blinked. "You mean?" "Yes," she said firmly. "We released the full recording ourselves. Not through leaks. Through me." It was bold, risky, unprecedented. But Anne had made up her mind. She wouldn't let the Queen's dying wish be twisted into a headline or weaponized for personal gain. If the world was going to hear her mother's voice, they would hear it in full, unedited, unmanipulated, and with the dignity it deserved. But before she could act, something unexpected arrived at Buckingham Palace. An anonymous package, marked only with a royal seal and a note that read, "You're not the only one who recorded her," and stared at it for a long moment, the air around her thick with dread. Another recording? Another secret? Whatever it was, she knew one thing for certain. The Queen's final wish was no longer just her burden. It had become the monarchy's most dangerous secret. And what came next would pull the royal family into a storm none of them could escape. The palace corridors were quieter than usual, but not peaceful. The kind of quiet that carries tension like a ticking bomb. Beneath the gilded ceilings and portraits of long-dead monarchs, whispered conversations flickered like candlelight. Courtiers avoided meeting Anne's gaze. Assistants ducked into side rooms when they heard her heels echoing down the marble floors. She could feel it. The fear, the hesitance, the calculation. Someone inside Buckingham Palace had betrayed the Queen, and now, the same machine that once moved at her command was working against her, and had lived through decades of royal storms. She'd seen scandals come and go, Divorces, affairs, lawsuits, documentaries. She'd watched the press twist headlines until truth became entertainment. But this was different. This wasn't about public image. This was about silencing her mother's voice. And had never been one to obey silence. She pushed open the door to the Privy Council chamber without knocking. Inside sat a cluster of senior advisors, their faces pale as they rose from their seats. The room smelled faintly of old books, perfume, and polished wood. King Charles sat at the head of the table, his expression a mix of exhaustion and frustration. And he began cautiously, "This isn't the time." "It's exactly the time," she interrupted. "You've read the papers. You've seen the broadcasts. They're weaponizing her last words. And you're sitting here drafting statements." Charles sighed heavily. "You think I want this? You think I enjoy watching them tear mother's memory apart? But we can't react emotionally, Anne. Not now." And stepped forward, eyes blazing. "This isn't about emotion. This is about truth. And right now, the truth is being buried under palace PR." One of the advisors, Lord Pembroke, the communications secretary, cleared his throat nervously. "Your Royal Highness, we're doing everything possible to contain this. We've issued denials, suppressed the clip, and threatened legal action against any outlet that publishes it further." And turned her glare on him. "Contain it? You think that's possible now?" Once the Queen's voice left those archives, there was no containing it. The only way to control this is to confront it. Charles rubbed his temples. "And if we publicly acknowledge the recording, it becomes official. We validate it. We give the tabloids a century's worth of fuel. They already have it." And shot back. "They're spinning it as if Mother despised Meghan. They're turning her last wish into a feud headline. That's not what she wanted." There was silence. A long, uneasy one. Then Charles spoke again, softly. "Then what did she want?" And looked at him. Really looked at him. And for a moment, her voice softened. She wanted the crown protected. She wanted the truth preserved. She didn't want her reign remembered for division or deceit. But if we bury her words now, we let those who stole them rewrite what she stood for. Lord Pembroke interjected, his voice trembling slightly. "With all due respect, Princess, there are broader implications." Acknowledging the Queen's private sentiments toward the Duchess could, and cut him off sharply. "The Duchess has made her sentiments toward this family quite public. She sat in interviews and accused us of cruelty and prejudice. She's written our history without ever living it. So tell me, Lord Pembroke, what exactly are you afraid of, the truth or the headlines?" The man lowered his gaze. Charles leaned back, exhaling deeply. "And if you go public with this, you'll tear what's left of our family apart." She met his eyes, unwavering. "What's left of our family is already in shreds." For a long moment, the only sound was the rain against the windows. Then Charles whispered, "You can't fight the press, Anne." She smiled coldly. "I'm not fighting the press. I'm fighting cowardice." Without another word, she turned on her heel and left. The door slammed shut behind her. Outside in the corridor, her aide Redford was waiting. "That went well?" he asked dryly, and gave a short, humorless laugh. They'd rather guard the palace walls than the Queen's memory. He followed her briskly down the hallway. "What now?" "We do it ourselves," she said. "We find who's pulling the strings." As they turned the corner toward the restricted archives, 2 guards stood at attention and flashed her identification pass and entered. The air inside was cold and metallic, the hum of machinery echoing off stone. Rows of secure drawers lined the walls, filled with decades of royal records, handwritten letters, speeches, private correspondences. And somewhere within those files was the truth about the missing recorder. Redford moved ahead, checking the logs. "Last access to the Queen's audio files was the night before she died," he said. 3 authorized users, the archivist, the chief aide, and... He stopped and looked up sharply. "And who?" He turned the tablet toward her. "Lord Pembroke." Her jaw tightened. "The communications secretary?" "Yes, ma'am." And exhaled slowly. The same man who'd just urged silence had been in the archives the night the recording was made. She straightened her posture, voice low and cold. "Summon him." Discreetly. Redford nodded. An hour later, Lord Pembroke entered her private study. His demeanor was polished, his smile professional. "Your Royal Highness," he greeted, trying for charm. "You wish to see me?" And gestured to a chair. "Sit." He obeyed, folding his hands neatly. "Tell me, she began, pacing slowly behind her desk. Why were you in the archives the night before my mother passed? He blinked. The archives? I wasn't. Don't lie to me. And snapped. Your name is on the access log. He swallowed. I was following protocol, ma'am. Reviewing audio equipment for press statements. Nothing more. Nothing more, she repeated icily. Then perhaps you can explain why that same night a recording device was activated at the Queen's bedside. His face flushed. I had no knowledge of that, Your Royal Highness. She leaned forward across the desk, her gaze cutting through him like glass. Do you think I'm a fool, Pembroke? You think I don't know how this palace works? You were in the archives, you accessed the audio logs, and days later the recording vanished. And now, it's in the hands of people who are using it to destroy my mother's legacy. Ma'am, please, he stammered. I only followed orders. And froze. Whose orders? Silence. She stepped closer. Whose orders, Pembroke? He hesitated, then spoke in a whisper. The King's office. Anne's heart skipped. Charles. He shook his head quickly. Not directly, ma'am. His advisors. The crisis team. They instructed me to secure all materials that might cause complications. It was meant to prevent scandal, not create one. And clenched her jaw. And you decided to hide the Queen's dying words. It was never meant to reach the press, he said desperately. We thought we were protecting the monarchy. By erasing her voice? And shot back. You don't protect the monarchy by burying the truth. You protect it by honoring it. Pembroke lowered his eyes. If you expose this, ma'am, you'll bring everything down. The press, the government, they'll turn it into chaos. And stared at him for a long moment. Then, quietly, she said, maybe the truth deserves a little chaos. She dismissed him with a curt gesture. As the door closed, Redford turned to her. He's hiding something else. I know, Anne replied. And I'll find out what. She walked to the window, staring out over the palace courtyard. The rain had stopped, leaving the cobblestones glistening under the moonlight. They're terrified of what Mother said, she murmured. But they should be more terrified of why she said it. That night, Anne couldn't sleep. The clock on her bedside table ticked louder than usual. Every sound in the palace seemed amplified. Footsteps in the corridor, whispers in the dark. Her thoughts raced. What had the Queen seen? What had she known about Meghan that had made her so resolute in her final wish? And rose before dawn, unable to rest any longer. She dressed quietly and made her way back to the archives. The guards, startled, saluted. She didn't stop to explain. Inside, she opened the Queen's personal audio files again. The system required biometric access, fingerprint, iris scan, voice confirmation. It recognized her immediately. One by one, she scrolled through decades of recordings. The Queen's reflections after major events, coronations, wars, family milestones. Each file carried the same calm tone, the same precise diction, until she reached the one marked final record, September 8, 2022. Her finger hovered over the play button. She hesitated only for a second, then pressed it. The Queen's voice filled the room. Protect the crown from those who would use it. Anne's breath caught. It was the same moment she'd lived, the same quiet, trembling voice. She must never return, the Queen continued. Not for revenge, not for sympathy, not for power. Anne's heart pounded. That last part had never been reported. The leak had cut it off right before, not for power. Someone had edited the recording, deliberately. And whoever did that had turned the Queen's protection into condemnation. And realized in that moment that the real battle wasn't about the recording itself. It was about the narrative. Someone inside the palace wanted Meghan portrayed as a victim, and the Queen as a bitter monarch clinging to old prejudices. They weren't protecting the monarchy at all. They were controlling it. She turned off the player and whispered to herself. They think they can silence her. They've forgotten who her daughter is. The first light of dawn began to spill across the windows as Anne stepped out of the archives, her expression set like steel. She no longer cared about decorum or protocol. The Queen had trusted her with a dying wish, and she intended to fulfill it, even if it meant going against her own blood. Because the truth was no longer hidden. It was recorded, altered, weaponized, and Anne wasn't going to let it stay that way. What she didn't know was that while she stood in that archive, determined and furious, halfway across the world, Meghan Markle was planning her own move, one that would ignite the next explosion in this royal war. And what came next would force and to make a choice that could either save the monarchy or destroy it completely. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of Meghan Markle's Montecito villa, painting the room in soft, golden light. Outside, the Californian coastline glistened, waves curling and crashing gently against the shore. But inside, all of that beauty was meaningless. Meghan sat rigidly in her designer armchair, coffee cooling untouched on the side table, eyes fixed on the screen of her phone. It had arrived overnight, a message from an anonymous source, an attachment labeled simply, "Final words." Her pulse spiked as she tapped it open. The audio hissed faintly. Then came the unmistakable, calm, authoritative voice of Queen Elizabeth II. She must never return. Meghan froze. The words repeated in her mind like a drumbeat. She pressed replay, straining to make sense of it. It was clear. The cadence, the tone, unmistakable. The Queen herself had said it. She swallowed hard. No, this can't be real. The world outside her villa remained tranquil, oblivious to the storm brewing in her mind. But inside, panic coiled in her stomach like a living thing. This wasn't a rumor. This wasn't a whisper. This wasn't tabloid exaggeration. This was her worst nightmare. The Queen had made a declaration, a final judgment, that she could never ignore. Meghan's fingers trembled as she scrolled through the message chain. There was no sender, no explanation, only the audio file, and a single line in the message body, the Queen's wish. Obey or suffer the consequences. Her heart pounded, chest tight. Meghan had survived scrutiny, media storms, and public opinion. She had even survived leaving royal life behind. But this felt different. This was sacred. This was a deathbed wish from a monarch who had ruled the world's most visible family for decades. And it directly involved her. She set the phone down and pressed her temples, trying to quell the rising panic. "How did they get this?" she whispered aloud. "Who would, Anne?" Anne. Her name sounded in Meghan's mind like a warning bell. Princess, and always the stoic one, the dutiful one, always loyal. Could and have been involved in this leak. Could she have deliberately allowed the Queen's last words to fall into the wrong hands? And then the fear turned to anger. Meghan leapt from her chair and started pacing the room. Every scenario flashed through her mind. Media outlets spinning the words, public opinion turning against her, sponsors and allies reconsidering their support. Her carefully curated narrative. The one portraying her as a victim, a woman unfairly treated by the monarchy, was under immediate threat. She grabbed her phone again and dialed her communications team. Within minutes, her assistant and PR strategist had joined a video call, all faces tense, all eyes on her. "Did you hear about this?" Meghan demanded, holding the phone close. Her voice shook, but there was a steel underneath the tremor. "Yes, Your Highness," said one of them, voice low. "We received the same audio clip. There's speculation it's from Buckingham archives. It's circulating." Meghan's jaw tightened. "Circulating? Are you saying people have already heard it?" "Not widely yet," the assistant clarified. "But insiders are talking. And if it leaks publicly, it will ruin your brand, your platform, everything you've built post-royalty." Meghan's mind raced. The idea of losing control, losing the narrative, was intolerable. "We can't let this happen," she said firmly. "Do you understand? I want it stopped before anyone hears the full message." The team exchanged uneasy glances. "That may be difficult," one said cautiously. "The recording is authentic. We can claim edits or fake audio, but people will notice. Experts will confirm it." Her fury and desperation escalated. She slammed her palm against the table, knocking over her coffee. "Then create a counter-narrative. Rewrite this story before it rewrites me." The PR strategist nodded, hands trembling slightly as she typed out a rapid series of talking points. Claim possible deepfake. Highlight misinterpretation. Emphasize in selective memory. Spin the Queen's intention as misunderstanding. But Meghan knew in her gut that the damage was done. The Queen's words, even out of context, carried authority no spin could override. She sank back into her chair, trembling now with a mixture of fear and fury. "And thinks she can control this story," Meghan whispered. "And thinks she can play the hero. But she doesn't understand what happens when the world turns against me." Her thoughts raced back to the Queen herself. She remembered glimpses from family events, the stiff politeness, the guarded eye, the faint distance that always lingered. She had assumed it was typical formality, protocol, duty, tradition. But now she wondered, had the Queen really been watching her all along? Observing every move, every comment, every interaction? And had she reached the conclusion that Meghan's ambition, her media savvy, her modern ideas of influence, were a threat to the institution she had spent a lifetime building? Meghan's panic gave way to calculation. She pulled her laptop toward her, fingers flying over the keyboard. Every ounce of her energy was now devoted to damage control. Emails were sent to media contacts, lawyers drafted statements. Her team started identifying which journalists were most likely to report the story accurately or inaccurately. But the more she planned, the more the weight of the situation pressed down on her. The Queen's authority was absolute. Even in death, it carried power. And Anne was wielding that authority like a shield, prepared to enforce her mother's final wish. Meghan leaned back in her chair and took a deep breath. Her pulse raced. "I can't let them win," she whispered to herself. "I won't. Not my legacy. Not my story. Not my life." The next several days were a blur of strategizing, interviews, and rapid-fire meetings. Every news outlet seemed to have a whisper about the Queen's final words. Royal commentators speculated endlessly. Did the Queen truly mean what it said? Was this a sign of royal disapproval? Could Meghan ever hope to return to public royal life? The questions spread faster than wildfire. Meanwhile, Anne remained silent, a looming presence across the Atlantic in Meghan's mind. Meghan knew and had the power to release the full recording, and the thought alone was enough to keep her up at night. Every scenario played in her mind, each one darker than the last. "And has the Crown's favor," she muttered to herself. "And the world will believe her. Even if I speak, they'll hear her first." Her anger simmered into resolve. If the Queen's words were meant to be a warning, Meghan decided she wouldn't let them define her. If the monarchy sought to silence her, she would fight back. With her voice, her platform, her lawyers, and, if necessary, with every ounce of influence she had cultivated over the years. Her phone buzzed. Another email from a journalist asking for comment. Another leak threatening to hit social media. Another rumor about and preparing to speak publicly. Meghan's pulse quickened, hands shaking as she formulated her next move. Somewhere deep inside, though, doubt gnawed at her. Could she fight against the Queen's last wish? Could she stand against the daughter who had been trained in duty, loyalty, and discretion for her entire life? And even if she did, what would the world think when a royal scion openly defied her mother's deathbed command? The questions were relentless, and the pressure was crushing. She leaned forward, gripping the arms of her chair, jaw set. "They think they can control me," she whispered. "They think I'll bow. They think I'll vanish quietly. But they don't know me." For hours, Meghan stayed in that room, cycling between fear, anger, and determination. Outside, the sun dipped low on the horizon, bathing the villa in an amber glow. Somewhere, the waves crashed against the shore, indifferent to the chaos inside. And yet, Meghan could feel it. The storm was coming, and was preparing her next move. The Queen's legacy was at stake, and Meghan's future, whatever it might hold, was suddenly uncertain. She closed her eyes and whispered, almost to herself, "I'll fight, no matter what it takes." But what Meghan didn't realize was that Anne's next move had already been set in motion. The Queen's final wish wasn't just a message, it was a strategy. And when Anne revealed the full truth, Meghan would face a reality she could neither spin nor escape. The game had begun, and no one was prepared for what came next. The early morning fog hung heavy over the English countryside, curling around the stone turrets of Windsor like a ghostly curtain. Inside, Prince Harry sat alone in the drawing room of Frogmore Cottage, the world outside blurring through the rain-streaked windows. He held a cup of tea in his hands, though he hadn't touched it for several minutes. His mind was somewhere else, tangled in guilt, regret, and disbelief. The news had reached him hours earlier, and had revealed the Queen's final wish. The words, blunt and damning, had pierced through the carefully curated narrative that he and Meghan had constructed over the past years. His mother, Princess Diana, had taught him resilience, compassion, and honor, but this was different. This was not about public perception. This was about the Queen, his grandmother, the woman who had shaped the monarchy, held the family together through decades of scandal, and now, in death, had spoken words that threatened to unravel everything he thought he understood. Harry had spent the morning replaying the phrases in his head. She must never return. Even as he repeated them silently, the weight of the command pressed down on him like an iron rod. The Queen's voice was calm, precise, and unwavering, even at her weakest. There was no room for misinterpretation. He set the cup down, untouched, and ran his hands through his hair. How had it come to this? After everything, the media scrutiny, the relentless paparazzi, the leaks, the divorces, the public speculation, the one thing he had hoped to preserve was the truth of his family. And now, the truth was weaponized against them. He thought of Meghan, somewhere across the Atlantic, likely spinning, strategizing, fighting to control a story she could never fully manage. And he felt torn. He had promised loyalty to the crown, as every royal does. But he had promised loyalty to Meghan too. His heart, always in conflict, now pulled him violently in both directions. In the quiet of the room, the door opened, and his private secretary, Thomas Kingsley, stepped in. His expression was grave. "Your Royal Highness, I'm aware you've received the updates," Thomas began cautiously. "The media is circulating reports, social media, tabloids, broadcasts. It's everywhere." Harry nodded. "I know." His voice was quiet, almost hollow. And she revealed everything?" Thomas hesitated. "Yes, sir. Princess, and has publicly confirmed the Queen's final wish. The recording, as you know, was authenticated by palace sources." Harry's fists clenched involuntarily. The words echoed in his mind again. She must never return. Not just Meghan, not just his wife. The Queen had commanded it. He rose from the chair, pacing the room. He could feel the weight of history pressing down on him. Every royal lesson, every cautionary tale, every whispered warning from his grandmother now collided with his personal life in a way he had never anticipated. "I should have known," he muttered under his breath. "I should have seen this coming." Thomas watched him carefully. "Sir." Harry shook his head. "No, no one could have anticipated this. Not even Mother." The mention of Diana's name brought a pang of sorrow, a reminder that he had always tried to carry her wisdom forward. But wisdom was useless now. This was not a lesson in courage or resilience. This was survival and moral compromise. He paused at the window, staring out at the gray sky. Across the world, Meghan would be strategizing, plotting, spinning narratives to defend herself, but he felt powerless. The Queen's final wish was not negotiable. It was absolute. And yet, loyalty to his wife demanded that he defend her. He ran his hands over his face, eyes closed. "What am I supposed to do?" he whispered. The words hung in the empty room, unanswered. He thought back to his marriage, the vows, the promises, the unspoken understanding that they were partners in every sense. But that partnership now collided with his heritage, his duty, and the unyielding expectations of the monarchy. The Queen's words had introduced a fracture he could not mend. The phone buzzed on the side table, breaking the silence. It was Meghan, calling from California. Harry's heart thudded as he answered. "Harry," her voice came, tense, panicked. "They have it." And released it. The Queen's words, "It's everywhere. They're twisting it. Do you understand what this means?" Harry closed his eyes. "I know," he said softly. "I heard. I've known since this morning." Meghan's voice rose. "Do you know what this does to us? To everything we've built? Do you understand, Harry? They're trying to destroy me, destroy us." "I understand," Harry said, struggling to remain calm. "But listen, we need a plan. Panic won't help." She laughed bitterly, a sound he barely recognized. "Plan? You think there's a plan that can undo this?" The Queen's voice, the last words of your grandmother, they're absolute. And's got them. The palace's machine is on their side. Even you're caught in the middle. Harry's stomach turned. She was right. He was caught. Between loyalty to his wife and respect for the Queen, between truth and survival, between love and duty. "You need to calm down," he said finally. "We'll handle it. We'll manage the narrative. But you have to trust me." There was a pause. Meghan's breathing was audible through the line. "Trust you," she echoed. "Do you trust in? Do you trust the crown? Do you trust anyone in that palace?" "Because right now, Harry, it feels like the entire institution is against me, against us." Harry felt a knot of despair in his chest. I don't know," he admitted. "I want to. But this isn't just about us anymore." The Queen's words, they're a command. and that's not something we can ignore. He hung up, placing the phone gently on the table. He sank back into his chair, staring at the ceiling, as if answers could somehow descend from above. But there were none. Only questions. Only fear. Only the crushing realization that he was living in a world where his grandmother's last words could dictate his wife's future, his family's stability, and his own moral compass. For hours, Harry sat alone. The soft ticking of the clock filled the room, counting down a time he no longer controlled.